Perfect. My name is Leonora Analea Maria Martelli. I go by Nora because that's a mouthful. So a little bit about me. I started playing in the SDA when I was 17. I started in Artemisia and did the whole mission trip thing for my church. Ended up in Eleonora for a couple of months, and now I play regularly in the mid-realm. So been doing this for almost a decade now, a couple years shy. So it wasn't very long after I had joined the SCA when I had found my style icon, which is Eleonora di Toledo. And it wasn't very long after that when I realized that no one really knows who she was, and she's kind of like a forgotten person in history, and I'm trying to change that. So that's kind of what this class is. Her style, I don't think, is completely unique to her, but it did revolutionize this fashion in Florence. The fashion in Florence didn't quite ever revert back to what it was. If anything, it got more progressive after her. So, I have to pull up my notes on my phone. All right, so to give you guys a brief outline, I will tell you guys who Eleonora di Toledo was. We'll talk about what the fashion was before she came to Florence. We'll also talk about how the fashion kind of changed. And then I will talk to you guys about the two contemporary garments that we have from when she was alive in Florence, as well as my research and resources. And then I will open it up to all of you guys to have a Q&A at the end. So that's kind of the outline I have for us. So Eleonora di Toledo was the daughter of the Viceroy of Naples. So Cosimo de' Medici was her husband, and it was decided that he needed a wife. And so Cosimo had a friend, assistant, advisor that took it upon himself to go and find Cosimo a wife. So this advisor friend went to the Viceroy of Naples because he knew that it would be a good alliance between Florence and them. And he said, "Hey, Viceroy of Naples, we have this very eligible bachelor. Can he marry your oldest daughter?" Viceroy of Naples said, "Sure." So Cosimo's advisor went back to him and said, "Hey, I got you a bride." Cosimo said, "Well, actually, if I had the choice, can I marry the younger daughter?" Viceroy of Naples did not care, so he picked his bride in Eleonora di Toledo. With their marriage in 1530s, like early 1530s, I think it was 1533, it brought a lot more of like trade and wealth in, along with, every political marriage of the time. And with that, she brought a lot of the Spanish influence in with her as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I will show you kind of what the fashion looked like beforehand. So, this isn't what I want. What do I want? There we go. Okay, so for those of you who do not know, this is a wonderful photo of Eleanor. In her younger years, she did die of tuberculosis. So when I show you portraiture of her, you can see which ones are from her later years because she has very sunken cheeks and honestly looks really sickly. But earlier in this time period, right before she comes, The fashion was all about those big giant sleeves. Dresses were either laced in the front or I'm assuming on the sides. I haven't been able to tell from the portraiture where exactly the lacing was, if it wasn't in the front, but I would assume on the sides. And you can see that all of this structure was pretty much at the natural, the waistlines were pretty much at the natural waist, and all of the support came from however they supported their garment. So either through multiple layers or stiffening, cardboarding, whatever you want to do. When I make dresses from this time period, I use a lightweight canvas as my interlining, and I get very similar shapes to these portraitures. But when Eleonora came, she brought with her this Spanish style, which turned from a very curved natural form, if you will, to a very conical shape. So in a lot of her portraiture, she is wearing an overcoat, but you can still see underneath that like things are very fitted. So you can see underneath here how it is fitted, and then in this famous portraiture of her and her son, you can see how it's very conical and fitted as well. Other examples of dress from the same time period when she was in Florence show very much that conical shape as well. There is no evidence that I have found in my research that she would have worn a farthingale. It is described, she is described as being very active and having not wanted to be weighed down by that. But when I wear my version of the burial gown, I do see a benefit from wearing a padded petticoat of some sort, or even just some sort of petticoat underneath in general to fill out the skirt a bit more. So let's see. So in essence, the fashion that she brought to Florence was very structured, which would have been similar, if not the fashion that she would have grown up with in the Spanish court with her father in Naples. So yeah, that's the basics of everything. I do have small scale versions of the Eleonora di Toledo burial gown, as well as the Crimson Pisa gown. They are contemporary gowns. They are dated within 3 years of each other. But it's theorized that they are constructed differently. When they started the conservation for the burial gown, all of the vegetable fibers had disintegrated. As you would expect, protein fibers tend to be a little bit hardier. So they don't entirely know where all of the seam lines and things were in the burial gown, but there have been like approximations made based on where the stitch lines and things are. The burial gown and the Crimson Pisa gown are constructed differently. So let me grab my small figures for you and we will talk about that, because that's honestly the part of everything that I'm kind of excited about. All right, I'm also going to sit a little bit further back. So these are my girls. Oop, she's backwards. There we go. So currently they are not fully dressed, and I did this with the express purpose of being able to show you guys the key differences between the dresses. But I will fully dress them in a minute. The primary thing with the burial gown is that they found a supportive underlayer in a red velvet underneath the dress. There is no evidence that this would have been boned, but they are guessing that it would have been stiffened. So it would have been supportive in that manner. There are ways to fit a supportive undergarment so it can give you the same look as, oh, excuse me. So it can give you the same look as if you were wearing a pair of stays underneath. I personally prefer to do it that way because I overheat really easily. But that's what I am assuming that the underbodice would have been in the burial gown. It also could have been stiffened with, what's the word? Reeds. It would make sense that if it was stiffened by reeds, but that would have rotted away with the rest of the vegetable fibers. When they started the conservation for the crimson peace dress, they found that the underbodice, which was the supportive underbodice, was actually stitched to the skirt, which I thought was really interesting because it means that the skirt has a center front opening, which could easily be closed with like hooks and eyes and things. But yeah, it was just really interesting that instead of going for a full kirtle underneath, it was a supportive underbodice stitched directly to the red velvet skirt. The underbodice in the extant piece was made out of like a golden tan corduroy. Since they did the conservation, that corduroy has been completely removed and replaced with a silk, just to help with the integrity of the garment as well as the longevity, because it is on display. So the actual Eleonora di Toledo dress is structured a little bit differently. I'm assuming that the bodice to the actual dress would have been stiffened as well, just to help prevent all of like the crinkling that happens as you wear a garment. But I'm assuming it would have been stiffened with some sort of canvas and not with like a reed, like what the underbodice might have been stiffened with. The construction is also opens up at the side back like this. So let me put it on my doll and I'll show you guys. Okay, so that's what the dress would look like on. It's also, I used the same pattern to make my full-size dress, which is in the background here. But that's what the dress would have looked like on. A key difference between the Crimson Pisa dress and the Eleonora di Toledo burial dress is the center back piece has a straight line from the point of the shoulder to the back of the waist, whereas the Crimson Pisa dress has more of an arm's eye curve and starts more on the side instead of the true side back, which I will show you. Let me grab.
That's enough.
Yeah, let me grab the bodice for that dress and I'll show you guys. So you can see how this bodice has a little bit more curved under it, where the burial gown would have just cut that off and put that piece onto the front. But other than that, the bodices are basically the same. So let me put this one back on.
No.
Ooh, it might not be going back on right now. All right, I'm not gonna fuss with that. So whenever you do research about this time period, and especially the court fashion in Florence in this time period, and the more you research about the crimson pisa gown and Eleonora di Toledo's burial gown, it really, there's a lot of information that says that these two dresses were probably made by the same tailor because it would have been Eleanor's preference. I disagree with that statement, and there are a couple of reasons why, which I kind of found out or developed as I was making the small scale versions. When I was making things, it became very apparent that there were two different forms of patterning that were used. Specifically for the crimson pisa dress, it has the shape and the look of a lot of the Alsaga patterns, which you can find in Matthew Nagy's Volumes of Fashion 2. Or you can even, like, I think the whole Alsaga pattern book is actually online. So you can go and look that up. But the pieces and where they sit directly falls in line with the Alsaga patterns. Whereas that straight line from the point of the shoulder to the waist that I pointed out earlier, as well as the shape of the arm's eye, is very telling that it was probably draped on a form or directly on her body. And like, I don't have a better way of explaining that other than like, those are the things that I have found that have really shown that. Yeah, I have a couple years of experience in both versions of patterning. And so in my mind, when I was drawing out these shapes and trying to match it, like, it felt very similar to those styles. The other thing that I have to kind of back up that the crimson pisa gown was probably made by a Spanish tailor and not by a Florentine one was when Eleonora and Cosimo went to visit the Pope in 1560. It is described that they Eleanor wore a dress of black velvet and took 13 ladies in dresses of crimson silk, crimson velvet. So if you look at the research that way, it makes it very plausible that the crimson pisa dress is actually one of the dresses that one of her ladies would have worn. It could have also been a dress that she had worn and passed down to one of her ladies. That you can see is probable because in the research, it mentions that it's very obvious alterations were made to the arm's eyes of the dress to bring them a little bit forward. And those alterations happened after the guards were made. So if you look at pictures of the extant pieces, you can see those alterations. And it's guessed, and what am I trying to say? Yeah, the same alteration was made to both dresses. So it would make sense that the dresses were made, delivered to Eleanor, and then altered by one of her tailors. And the same alteration being made to both dresses makes it very plausible that they were both worn by her. So I can never manage to fill an hour. Sorry, guys. I'm also kind of throwing a lot of information at you guys, like all at once. So again, I will be doing a Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, hopefully I can answer them better. My two favorite resources for these dresses in particular, as well as the life of Eleonora di Toledo, is this book. It is The Cultural World of Eleonora di Toledo. It basically goes over her life from the moment she was engaged to Cosimo to when she died. And it specifically has a chapter on her burial dress, which I found was very interesting. It quotes the original, not the original conservation, it quotes the conservation that was done by Jana Arnold and the other conservators that worked with her very extensively. And in that conservation report, it was, they did a lot of dye testing on the fabric. And so there is a hypothesis out there that the original burial gown, instead of being white, which we get that description from the original conservation report in 1857, I think is that date, is when they originally described her burial dress as white. When they did the dye testing later in the later part of the 1900s, it's actually hypothesized that the dress could have been a golden to pale yellow with brown or black guards. So, yeah, fun facts. The other book, which is a good resource, but I wouldn't take it as your primary source of research, is the Moda di Firenze book, specifically for Eleonora di Toledo. This book was written by a researcher that specifically looked at the garderoba and everything listed in there. And she has her own hypothesis of the dresses, and it's very well thought out and very well rationalized on which dress in the garderoba she thought was the burial gown. There are just some things that have been stated specifically about the burial gown that are contradictory to the original conservation report, which I have read, read pieces of. I still need to contact the School of Historical Dress to try to get that actual report. But yeah, let's see. Yes, those are my two main resources. There are a lot of reference pictures for both of these gowns online if you just Google them. So I've kind of just surmised everything off of that. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up to a Q&A. I think I've vomited enough information at you guys. So if you have any questions, then let me know. You're going to have to unmute yourselves first, though.
So is this construction where you have the bodice separate from the skirt common? This is a little post what the period I look at is.
As far as I know, yes and no. I do, one sec, I have to think. I'm pretty sure that in Elizabethan gowns that the bodice and the skirt are constructed differently. And the honest answer is I don't have a good answer for you. There are examples of both, and I can see the pros and cons of each. So a question from the chat is, many of the paintings show a gold mesh over the shoulders. Do we know what that was made of, or was that knit? So I'm assuming you're referring to her gold net and pearled partlet. We are, what's it called? So when her body was exhumed, her hairnet, which is made very similarly to that, was listed in a was listed that she was wearing it when she was exhumed. But between when she was exhumed and when they did the conservation at in the later part of the 1900s, her hairnet as well as her shoes were lost. So we do not know how that was made. There are a lot of people who have guessed how it was made, either by sewing ribbons together or by bobbin lace is another thought of how that was made. I personally do not know. I have not tried to recreate that in any way, but it was one of the signature things that she wore. If you study the portraiture of Eleonora di Toledo, she pretty much wore the same jewelry in every portraiture and switched out her dresses. So. The paintings of the elaborately patterned dresses, were they worn this way or embroidered later? So there is, I think, evidence of both being embroidered before they were sewn together, as well as appliquing the embroidery on afterwards. If you read the conservation report, I think Jana Arnold was the one who suggested that the guards or all of the embroidery on the burial dress came from a different dress that was remade into the one that she was buried in. Specifically for the Crimson Peace dress, you can see that the embroidery was done on strips of silk and then appliqued on as well. Any thoughts on her stockings? Her stockings have been preserved. You can find, any thoughts on her stockings or shoes? I'm assuming that she would have worn silk stockings, being the lady of high status that she was. She is given the honorary title of the first Duchess of Tuscany, even though she died before that title was given to Cosimo. It was given to her as an honorary thing. So I'm assuming she would have worn silk stockings and leather shoes, very similar to the time period. The ones from her burial that were exhumed with her for her burial dress were knitted. I personally prefer knitted socks to sewn ones. So, I mean, I'm assuming she probably could have worn both. Does anyone else have any questions for me?
We'll just unmute. Do you have any suggestions for somebody wanting to kind of start in this area of costuming? Kind of good resources?
So yes, I have a YouTube channel where I go over basic things. I actually have the entire construction process for my version of the Eleonora di Toledo burial dress up on my YouTube channel. Awesome. Which is Scraps and Sequins. Morgan Donner is also a really good resource for this time period. She has a lot of videos up on her YouTube channel, which is her name, Morgan Donner. She also has a blog, which has a lot more resources and projects that she's done that she did before YouTube. So I learned a lot of the basics for when I started from Morgan Donner's blogs. So I would definitely recommend starting there. Books to start with, because internet isn't always reliable. Let's see. So the two books that I would recommend for a beginner would definitely be Patterns of Fashion, which is the first book. It does have the pattern that I used for the Eleonora di Toledo burial gown in it. It's very reliable. Janet Arnold is the one who did this. It has now been taken over by the School of Historical Dress, but the practices remain the same. They study the extant garments and then produce actual usable gridded patterns that you can scale up and then adjust to your body size. The other one that I would recommend would be the Modern Maker Volume 2. Yeah, this is honestly my patterning Bible. Because all of the shapes and silhouettes were very similar to each other in this time period, especially as you get more conical and fitted, which is what Eleanor's style definitely was. The patterns can kind of shift between the countries and regions. It really comes down to like, oh, well, this era had more of like a rounded neckline, or this era had this style of guards. So you can research that through portraiture. But the basic patterns and shapes I would definitely get from the Modern Maker. So hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
What do you like to use for your mock-ups typically?
You're assuming I make mock-ups.
What's that?
You're assuming I make mock-ups. Usually what I do, because mock-ups are really frustrating for me, I will make a wearable mock-up. So I will make like an actual garment and then wear it around and see how I feel in it. When I was still trying to figure out all of the shapes, I would make all of my garb out of tablecloths that I found at the thrift store. I have since moved to linen. The best advice that I can give for mock-ups is to use material as similar as you can get to what you want the final garment to be, because then it'll give the same structure and feel. So if you were trying to make a mock-up out of a lightweight linen, but you were using heavyweight upholstery fabric for the actual garment, it wouldn't give you the same feel, and what might feel good in a lightweight linen will not feel good in the heavyweight upholstery. So that's my advice on mock-ups.
So this is Sylvie. I'm in the West Kingdom, and I'm sorry to say I popped in late for your class. I don't know if you remember it. What originally drew you to the late period styles?
I call Eleonora di Toledo my fashion muse. When I first joined the SCA, I was like, I'm going to be a Viking. And then I started doing the Viking thing, and I was really into it. And I was really happy with it. And then I started browsing like Renaissance clothing, and I came across a portrait of Eleonora di Toledo, and I went, who is she and can I be her? And so since then, I started doing research, like figuring out what time period she was from, what region and country. And as soon as I found that out, I started looking at lower class garments. So that's another thing. If you are just getting into this time period, do not start with a court gown. Do look at the market scenes and things like that that you can find in paintings, and start with a lower class garment. It will be cheaper to produce. You will be able to learn how to fit these shapes to your body, and then like you can go ahead and make your court gown out of your $20 a yard material and know, hey, this pattern works for my body. But yeah, I started with the lower class dresses. I put all of the guards on them in like cotton material, and I did a couple rounds of the side back lacing, which I have on the burial gown version that I did, just to make sure that I understood the structure and how things fit. And then now I've moved on to making the actual court dresses, which honestly make me happy because I like the pretty stuff. So.
One thing that I want to note on that with the middle/lower class garments, the Tudor Tailor have a new book that's due out like literally this month called The Typical Tudor, available for pre-order on Etsy, and I expect I'll be sending them out in the next 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, Tudor Tailor is an excellent resource. Like I was saying earlier, with basically all of the silhouettes and patterns being transferable, because they all gave you the same shape and silhouette. Like Tudor Tailor is another good resource if you want to invest in those books over the other two that I have suggested, or invest in all of them and have all the information.
All is good.
Yes. Oh, excuse me.
So what's the next project?
My next project?
Yes, your next.
I am making a full-scale reproduction of the Crimson Pisa gown. In construction, not a direct recreation. So you can actually see it right here, the brown and green that's hanging up right there. The brown is the fitted underbodice, and then the green is going to be my skirt. For this one, because the Crimson Pisa dress has a lot more volume in the skirt, I am putting a pair of hoops underneath it. So it's going to give me a completely different shape than the burial gown does. Mostly because I made the burial gown to go over a pair of stays, whereas I'm using a fitting the fitted bodice, self-supporting bodice method for this dress, which again, I will be posting my construction methods for that on my YouTube channel. So if you want to keep up with all my random projects, you can go follow me there. But yeah, hopefully in a year I will have both dresses and I can like actually talk to people about the pros and cons and like show you real examples versus just on my dolls. So.
I actually found the dolls very helpful because you can easily see the whole thing at one time and certain parts of it more easily.
Exactly, you can point them out a lot easier.
Yeah, I definitely made the dolls to be a teaching tool, and it's actually a goal to make a male and female doll for every major fashion shift between 1480 and 1600. So I'm hoping that will be done within the next 5 years. It's going to take a little bit more research than I currently have the time and energy for, because I also want to study the politics of that time and how the politics influenced the fashion. So.
Wow, that would be amazing. Quite the undertaking.
I mean, it's not terribly difficult. You just, follow the Medici family, and then after Lorenzo the Magnificent, they kind of died off in importance. But then Florence also became very pious, which caused like the biggest fashion change I think I have ever seen. But yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Welcome. So we do have time for a couple more questions if there's things that people want to know.
Can you talk about what kind of, if there's anything specific in construction for like shifts that you wear with these dresses?
So I am actually wearing my shift because I wanted to be dressed up, but it is way too hot in my studio to actually wear historical clothing. So basic shifts don't really change between like the time periods at all. This one is a little bit more fitted than I usually make. It doesn't drop off my shoulder as much, which means that instead of cutting the body a straight rectangle, I tapered it a little bit. And then the pieces that I tapered, I actually turned into side gores. Oh, actually I didn't. I cut bigger side gores because I wanted this to be really flowy. But you could cut that into side gores and use what you taper off to be side gores, and then it'll give you a very fitted, slim shift. I also did more of a fitted sleeve. So this is a shift that I would wear with sleeves, just because it's not going to really bunch up at all. When I wear my lower class, I actually wear collared shirts and really poofy sleeves because I don't wear any sort of sleeve over my lower class. Mostly because of temperature regulation. I need to be able to regulate my temperature or else I overheat and get really sick. So I think there's a basic shift tutorial on Morgan Donner's, what's it called, YouTube channel. So that'll probably give you better information than what I just gave you.
What do you think of the realm of Venus?
I think it is a good resource. It is interesting to read through how other people have recreated garments. You can learn a lot from how other people recreate garments. Yeah, I mean, it has pretty pictures. You can learn how other people make things. It's not a resource that I use regularly because I look mostly at the extant garments and conservation reports to guide how I make things. But if you're just starting and you're like, okay, like, what do I need to support this hem? It can be a good resource for you.
So in reproducing your garments, are you doing hand sewn garments or machine sewn?
I do a blend of both, hand sewing and machine sewing, mostly because, yeah, if they would have had the tools, they would have used them.
No, I've got absolutely no problem with machine sewing. Faster is faster.
Yes, I am also all for machine sewing and hand finishing, especially for my burial gown. I actually hand stitched the lining of the bodice in, and the hem is completely hand stitched as well. So anywhere where I could finish easily, where like machine sewing would have been visible, I finished it by hand.
Okay, and you said this was going to be worn over a hoop skirt. Are you using like a bum roll with it or not?
Yes. To get the correct shape that I see in all the portraiture, you need to have a bum roll. So a bum roll and a pair of hoops for the crimson piece of gown. For the burial gown, I just wear a bum roll underneath it.
And one last one on that. Is your bum roll off of the Modern Maker Volume 2 pattern or a different?
No, I made that one up. So this is my bum roll. And I looked at the Tudor Tailor one and I looked at the Modern Maker one, and then I looked at my body and went, well, I need about that shape. So I made about that shape. So when it comes to like padding out a form, I wing it, mostly because padding is very individual, and the pads that I, or bum roll that I make for myself would not look the same or necessarily good if someone else used my bum roll. So Modern Maker does have a bum roll pattern. Personally, for me, I felt like it was too big and full for the burial dress that I was making. But now that I am making the other one, it would make more sense to have a more full bum roll to give it more of a shape over my hoops. So I might play with that later as well.
So when you're wearing these dresses, are you wearing it over a supportive kirtle, or is the support built into the dress? Because I know you mentioned needing to keep cool.
Mm-hmm. So for the burial gown, I have a pair of boned stays, boned Elizabethan stays that I wear underneath it. And then I wear the dress directly on top of that. I could wear a kirtle underneath that would have structure in the hem, which would give the hem more body, but because I need to regulate my temperature, it's not really plausible for me. For my recreation of the crimson dress, the under bodice is self-supported. It is made out of 2 layers of linen, so it should breathe really nicely. And then I will have the over bodice on top of that. So it's about the same amount of layers either way, but I do try to keep those layers to a minimum while still keeping it supportive.
So you mentioned talking about possibly wanting some kind of petticoat or underskirt for your gray gown. Have you thought about what kind of underskirt you might do for that? Are you thinking maybe corded or something along those lines?
Yeah, if I made a supportive petticoat for that, it would definitely be corded. I am not currently inclined to do that because I have tried making a corded petticoat and I lost my mind. So if I ever, get up the gumption, I would definitely go that route. But for now, I did put a horsehair braid in the hem of that dress, which does give it some body and support, but not necessarily all the shape that I would necessarily want if I wanted that dress to be as accurate as possible.
Tell me about your hoops.
My hoops are huge. How about I show you my hoops?
They're awesome. They're awesome. I love them.
Have you been following me on Instagram? Is that how you know about my hoops?
I'm your buddy on Facebook, so I stalk you quite often.
Oh, I forget.
I know.
So these are my hoops. They are huge. Let me move this and I will put them on for you. So I didn't use any particular pattern for my hoops either. I did the math and hated myself the entire time. So there is about a 4-yard hem in these hoops. So it's a lot of volume. And when I did the test fit of the green dress over it, it was very nice and flowy, but I do have about 4.5, 5 yards in the hem of the green skirt. You always want to have between a half and a full yard more in your skirt hem than you do your hoops. That way it will lay over really nicely. And also, if you put any petticoats between your hoops and your dress, it'll make sure that there is room in the hem of your dress for those as well. So these are my hoops. They're big. I don't know how I feel about wearing hoops yet, but there they are.
Social distancing for the win.
Not quite social distance status, but people would look at me funny enough and not come near. So, all right, we have about 5 minutes left. Are there any last minute questions?
Not a question, but this was awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your research and your passion for this.
You're welcome.
Yep, I agree. Thank you very much for your class. This has been informative.
Welcome.